Welcome to the Rusted Garden Homestead. In today's Friday morning ramblings, even though it's Sunday, we're going to talk about gardening zones and what to start indoors now. No need to worry about, starting perfectly 6 weeks before stuff goes outside. But it is snowing. It's February. This is the coldest time in my area. So we'll get down to single-digit temperatures this month. And then starting in March, I'll be able to start rolling out different plants like potatoes, maybe some peas. And just let me show you what I'm starting indoors. Talk about how do you know when to get things started. And I'm going to show you some tricks because I'm starting stuff under grow lights, and I'm also going to be moving them out. You can't really see them here. Maybe straight down there, a couple of cold frames. I've got the polycarbonate tunnel. I'm going to put a lot of seeds that I start indoors, meaning they germinate, break the surface, grow a little bit. They're all going to go outside. It'll give me a lot more room. All right, let's go over to my grow light station. Now, a lot of stuff I start early so that I can, have the prop plants to put in videos. But generally speaking, garden zones are outdated. With climate change, frost dates coming later, sometimes earlier in places, and sometimes coming later in the season. It's just more chaotic for me. For example, last year I had this really terrible deep frost, deep freeze late into May, and it killed off a lot of my plants. Everything recovered. But gardening zones, you don't really need to use them anymore. They actually don't make sense. Gardening Zone 7 is here in Maryland. It's also in Tennessee. Tennessee doesn't get these cold temperatures like we do. So what do? Basically look up online your area and find the general time when frost starts in your area and when frost ends in your area. And that's how you figure out when to start growing. So I get frost in October, towards the end, on average, and I get frost sometimes in May, on average. So October to May 15th, warm weather crops like tomatoes and peppers could be at risk because of frost. But it's a good time to start planting cool weather crops because they can take a frost. A lot of their leaf structure can freeze. On a side note, potatoes, I'm getting ready. I just did a video on that. I will link it. But this is the time that you want your potatoes to start sprouting. It's called chitting potatoes with a CH. And you can just put your potatoes in a brown bag. And if you have a good eye, you can see that some of the greenery is starting to grow on the potatoes. So potatoes, you count back about 6 weeks to when you're going to put them into the ground. They can go into the ground when there's frost around. But when the greenery comes up, if frost hits the greenery, it's going to kill it back. So you kind of want to set the timing so that when the green breaks the surface, the risk of frost is less in your area, if that makes sense. Now, you can start them. I'm going to be starting some in March, some in April. I'm going to be growing potatoes all year long to really try and get a harvest all the way into November. But if the greenery pops up and you're still in a frost period, you can cover up the greenery basically with a container, a vase, anything, straw, and it'll protect it from the frost. So let's just talk about a strategy that I'm using this year, and I really encourage everyone to experiment. So I have one level, 2, 3, 4, 5 levels. I can put in 20 flats. When the plants get bigger, they come down to the lower area. And some of those peppers I'm actually started really, really early so that I can have a massive root system established. And when I put them out into the garden, I hope that they take off and I have peppers earlier. 20 plants can go into here, but as they get bigger, you need more and more space. So one thing that I'm doing this year is I love leeks and onions. So these are all leeks and onions just seeded in the flats. I already have one outside in my cold frame. So when these get a little bit bigger, maybe this much taller, that would be like, say, 10 days, maybe 14 days, these flats are just going to go out into the cold frames or my polytunnels. I will link the polytunnel video to show you how easy it is to make this sort of cloche tunnel cold frame, I call it. It's really easy to make. But these aren't going to have to sit down here, take up space, and grow. they're all going to go right outside. Now the strategy is germination. You want them to germinate indoors where it's warmer, 65, 70 degrees, get growing, and then they're going to go into a cold frame where it should protect them from frost. And they will kind of grow at their own pace, but they're going to be ready come later March, April to go into my garden. That's for the onions. I'm going to be doing that for other plants. Now the onions can take a freeze, so I'm going to put them out first. Next week, it's going to be 9 degrees, so that cold frame at night. So that cold frame is going to not be able to protect these, keeping them closer to 32 degrees, but I know onions can survive. So that's one way to free up space, is use your starting lights just to get things germinated, established for a couple of weeks, and then they can go outside into the cold frame if they're frost tolerant. We'll talk a little bit more about frost tolerant plants. So why do you start seeds indoors? Reason number one, it's enjoyable. Reason number two, it will save you a lot of money in the long run. I've talked about this before. Transplants, when you're getting, to the size of tomato plants like that, they're easily, if you're lucky, $2.50. Realistically, about $3 a plant. You can grow your transplants for pennies a plant. Lets you grow different varieties you're not going to find at the big box stores. Third reason is because you have a shorter season, or you have frost and winter freezes, so you're trying to grow your seed starts indoors, get them to anywhere from 4 weeks old to up to 12 or 16 weeks old, so that you get a jump on the season. You can get them into the ground when the ground is warmer. They're ready to go. You get more production, more flowers, more fruit, whatever you decide to do. That's the reason. How many lights do you need? Depends on how many plants you're growing. So I'm just always growing a lot, let's just say, over 1,000 plants. So I need several levels. I have to keep moving things around. I have to pot up. And that's a good point that I want to bring up. People always ask, do I have to start in these little 6 cells? You get 72 plants in a flat by starting them like that. Those are herbs and peppers. You don't have to start that way. If you're not wanting to grow, 100, 200, 300 plants, there's more peppers back there. These are Shasta daisies in the front. I grow perennials. Now is a great time to get your perennials started. Well, as I'm rambling, this is ginger, so I'll show you that in a second. I'm starting all my ginger indoors so that I can actually plant plants versus the rhizome in the ground. I want more ginger this year. So if you're not starting a lot of plants, you can start, maybe a 6-pack of, I don't know, let's see if I have them. I don't know, let's just say this 6-pack are tomato plants. You could start them like this. You could up pot them. These are Quart root pouches. I sell them at my seed shop. This is a great way to really be conscious of the environment and not have to pot up. So if you are going to pot up, say that's because you're growing a lot of plants, you grow them like this. When they get to about this size, the roots are coiling in there, you put them into these Quart pouches. If you don't need a lot of plants, you can just fill these up. You could use a container like this. You could put in your 2 seeds. I always say start 2 or 3 seeds thin to the single tomato plant, and they can just stay in there, so you don't have to pot up. If you're interested in the root pouches, any of the seed starting stuff, it's at my shop. I'll put links in the description. But the root pouch Quart things come like this. I think it's 50 in the package that we sell. So you can start your plants just like that. You don't have to start in the small cells and keep potting up if you have room. That would mean, maybe you just have 2 levels of lights. You fill up the containers because you just want them to stay in there and you're good to go. But when you get to all these plants, it can be, it just takes up a lot of room. Here's some tomatoes I'm starting in here. Those are for an experiment. So let's start with the question, when do I start these indoors? People write me all the time, when do I start this? When do I start that? The answer is, dramatic pause. Yeah, I forgot what I was thinking. The answer is, what is the temperature of your ground when your plants are mature for transplanting? That means that if you start your tomatoes here in my area in December, they're going to get big like this. They're going to go out into the ground when the ground is still frozen. That's not going to work. They're warm weather crops. They're just going to sit there, doesn't make sense. So for your warm weather plants, tomatoes, peppers, you start anywhere for tomato plants 6 to 8 weeks before the ground outside is about 50 degrees and the ambient temperature, the surrounding temperature of the air, is 60, 70 degrees. How do you figure that out? Go online, find when your temperatures are averaging upper 40, 50 degree nights, you're getting 60 degree days, sometimes 70 degree days, you're getting rain. After a week or two of that, your soil's about 50 degrees. You can move your transplants in. So let's say for me, to keep it simple, May 15th is when I decide that the average soil temperature is 50. Chance of frost is really slim. It's okay if a couple cold days come in. Count back 6 or 8 weeks. So May 15th to April 15th is 4 weeks. To March 15th is 8 weeks. So somewhere between March 15th and April 1st, I would start my tomato transplants indoors. You only want 6 or 8 weeks of growth. Peppers, these have been growing since December. Peppers you can grow, I recommend starting 8 weeks minimum, 10 weeks, 12 weeks. You want them to get the size. They grow more slowly. Same thing. They like the 50 degree temperature. May 15th, April 15th, March 15th is 8 weeks. Go back another 4, middle of February, about now. February, first week of February, middle of March, that's when you would start the peppers in my zone. Now your bigger warm weather crops like squash, cucumbers, zucchini, any really big vining crop, they tend to grow very quickly indoors. You want to get them outside fast, so you would count back 4 weeks. That's kind of what I do with the warm weather crops. Now, cool weather crops, that's a whole other sort of beast. Right in here, actually in these larger cells, so that I don't have to pot up, right in the middle is sage, to the right is thyme, that's oregano. There's some onions back there. They were started back towards really the end of December, beginning of January. Your perennial herbs, oregano, thyme, sage, even parsley, even though maybe you want to do them a little bit later, can all be started 10 weeks, 12 weeks before they would go outside. They get massive root systems. You can divide these plants up. They can take the cold. They can take the frost. So you're kind of targeting when frost is still around. For me, that would be April. You know, I'll still get some frost and cold days. So my herbs can go outside in April. So I would count back. Let's say April 15th, February 15th, that's 4 weeks. January, 8 weeks. Somewhere between the end of December, middle of January, I can start oregano, thyme, sage, chives, get them going. Other plants that fall into that same pattern are the perennial flowers. Shasta daisies can take a light frost. Right in there, my purple cone flowers up. You can see the date on there is 12/24. Today's February 6th or 7th. So they grow slowly. So you really want to give them that 10 weeks, 12 weeks. That's butterfly weed. And there's lemon balm. And that's essentially how you do it, is you pick the 50 degree temperatures, no frost, or I should say 50 degree soil temperature, no frosts, 60 degree days, 70 degree days, count backwards for your warm weather crops. Now your cool weather crops are lettuces. The lettuce leaf can actually freeze. Your kale can freeze. Kale, I think, tastes better in the cold. You can put beets out now. Well, not out, but you can start them now. They can take the cold. Cabbage, broccoli, cauliflower, all the brassica family crops can take a freeze. Now, the thing with them is if we start lettuce, kale, cabbage, cauliflower, broccoli indoors, they're going to sprout, but they're going to be sprouting into 70 degree temperature. And they tend to get leggy, not because there's not enough light, but because it's so warm, it accelerates their growth. So I don't have any cool weather crops to show you because I'm starting them a little bit later this year. I'm just going to let them break the surface. Today I'm going to do a whole flat like that of kales, some lettuces, my leafy greens. When they break the surface, soon as they break the surface, soon as I use the warmth of the house to get them germinated and going, and about a week from that period, they're all going to go outside into my cold frames or my polytunnels. And I'm going to save all this room in here because I'm not growing them to size. They're also going to be stronger, healthier, stockier plants because they love the cold weather. They like 40-degree soil temperature. They don't mind upper 30s, lower 40 day temperatures. They enjoy the cold. Now, a couple tricks you can do is, I've talked about overseeding and all that. These are trays, and again, I encourage you to really experiment. I have a journal at the seed shop. Keep a journal, get a notebook, write down what you're doing, write down the dates of when your seed's starting indoors, write down when you put them outside, mark down your frost dates, and over time you will have the information you need to really figure out when to seed start indoors and outdoors. So these are for apples, basically, from Costco. When you buy different fruit, they come in these plastic things. So what I'm going to be doing is just filling up these circles, really, with starting mix. I would overseed different perennial herbs, such as oregano, oregano, really thyme and chives. You could put some sage in here. I would put in my perennial flowers, let them germinate indoors. This will get closed with a hole popped in it. It's going to give them extra insulation. These are going to go out into the cold frame. Again, I'm going to wait for them to germinate inside, but then I'm going to use this in the cold frame under the polytunnels and really be able to seed start so much more than using, these 5 shelves. I get a lot growing, but it's a lot of work. So why not kind of seed start it, meaning germinate it, let it grow a week or two, get it outside, forget it, see what happens. And I'm sure that kales, lettuces, the cool weather crops will do fine with this method, but it is going to be an experiment. I'm not going to do a formal video on it. It's going to stay in the ramblings until I test it out for a year and can really talk about it. So gardening zones, stop worrying about it. Check out your first frost date, your last frost date. If you don't have frost dates, you don't really need to start indoors unless you want to kind of control the germination, get them going, and then you can move them outside. So gardening zones are really sort of outdated. There's not a lot of value. Don't overstress about when to start things indoors. Warm weather crops need to be planted into 50-degree soil. Cool weather crops can take a frost. Now let's wrap up with something that I think is pretty cool. See if I can do this without spilling it. That's ginger. I put in a bunch of the rhizomes. I believe ginger's rhizomes. One hand, and it's just a flat of starting mix. These were put in 12/9, so it's been 60 days. After 60 days, they're just starting to sprout up. Here's another one. And I basically kept it under my grow lights. This was on a heating pad for a plant heating pad. Don't use a regular heating pad. Risk of shock that way. Heated maybe 45 days, but let me dig one out. So here's one in there. Shallow, just a little bit of soil under there. And let's take this one out. If I pop it out, you're going to see all the growth. When this greenery comes up, I'll be able to just break it off. It'll have roots established. It'll be able to go right out into my garden. So this is a great way to start ginger. I'll be doing a video on this, but I needed to get everything growing, make sure that it worked. This will give me a huge 60-day jump in growing ginger. Last year, the harvest was kind of poor. I got ginger. But if I'm able to let these grow indoors, let the roots set up, I'm not worried about the cold getting them outside. I have greenery already growing. I'll protect them in the polycarbonate tunnels. I should have a ton of ginger. Anyway, that's a lot of information about starting stuff indoors. And again, don't stress about exactly 6 weeks or 8 weeks. Experiment, take notes. You know, if you're too soon, you know, you're too soon. Better to have plants that are a little bit bigger than to start too late. Either way, you're going to have success. The truth is, sometimes tomato plants that you get out that are bigger, maybe have 6 weeks, 8 weeks, even 10 weeks of growth, and then maybe you put out next to it a couple weeks later when the soil warms up a plant that's only 3 or 4 weeks old. As the temperatures get warmer, both of those plants end up looking exactly the same. So sometimes you don't even really save that much time. It's more just kind of fun to get them out there. That's for gardening areas that have 4, 5, 6 months of summer. If you're in a place like Alaska, you only have 2 months of growing. You definitely want to have mature transplants to really help you out in your garden. Anyway, hope this gives you some information. Don't be afraid to experiment. Don't feel like you have to follow everything perfectly. Gardening is about just enjoying the process, experimenting, take notes, and I would consider trying to do this with your ginger. I think this is going to be really, really successful. Thanks so much for watching. Check out the description for different, seed starting stuff I showed you, and please ring the bell in the bottom right corner. That will notify you of the videos coming up. I'm going to be doing a lot on ginger, a lot of different videos this year that I haven't really covered, so I hope you're part of that. Have a great day, and if it's snowing in your area, spring is just around the corner.